You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work.
Frank, I'm talking about character. I'm talking about... Hell, Leo, I ain't embarrassed to use the word. I'm talking about ethics. You know I'm a sporting man. I like to lay the occasional bet, but I ain't that sporting. When I fix a fight, say I pay a 3-1 favor to throw a goddamn fight, I figure I got the right to expect that fight to go off at 3-1. But every time I lay a bet with his son of a bitch, Bernie Birnbaum, before I know it, the odds is even up. Or worse, I'm betting on the short money. The Sheeny knows I like short things. He's selling the information. I fixed the fight. Out-of-town money comes pouring in. The odds go straight to hell. I don't know who's selling to it. Maybe the Los Angeles Combine. I don't know. The point is, Bernie ain't satisfied with the honest dollar he can make off the Vic. He ain't satisfied with the business I do on his book. He is selling tips on how I bet. And that means part of the payoff that should be riding on my hip is riding on someone else's. So, back we go to these questions. Friendship, character, ethics. So it's clear what I'm saying.
As mud.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens. And with me today, I have a guest I am thrilled to have on who has never been on. Can you introduce yourself, sir?
Hey, this is Jim Dedman. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I am a longtime fan of the website and podcast.
And Jim is the person who got me to start my blog in 2003. Believe it or not, I've been doing this that long. If you don't know there's a blog, there is. You can go look for it. It's signal-watch.com. And Jim also is one of the people who started saying, you should start podcasting, like at some point a few years ago. And I was like, no. Now, Jim hasn't been on the podcast, but I guess you listen to it from time to time. Amy was the person who forced my hand and made me start doing it. But Jim was the first person I remember saying, you should start a podcast, and me going, you're crazy. I don't have time for that. And here we are like 160 episodes later or something like that. So
I've changed history twice.
Yeah, absolutely. And so all of you who have listened to the podcast, who have read the blog over the years, you have Jim to thank. So Jim and I knew each other in film school. We sat next to each other in screenwriting. And I found Jim to be wildly entertaining. We did a lot of kind of muttering to each other back and forth during class and whatnot. So, and so we've known each other for decades at this point.
Almost as long as, or almost as many years ago as this movie we're going to talk about today.
That's right.
But not quite.
And you yourself have been involved with film from time to time. You're now an attorney that does nothing with entertainment, as far as I know.
Not really, certainly not entertainment law, but every once in a while, my practice will shift into some entertainment-related issues, which is fun when that happens. But I majored in screenwriting, did some screenwriting, produced a movie 15 or 16 years ago that was a fun little experience, but never anything professionally or anything like that.
But today we're going to talk about a movie that Jim and I talked about, I think, within the first week of knowing each other. So flashback to the mid 90s, late 90s, if you will. And we're talking about one of my canon films. This is a canon episode, and probably my super canon film. And it is Miller's Crossing.
I was thinking about when I first saw it, and I don't think it was in 1990 when the film came out. And as we mentioned before we started, we're recording this on September 19th, which is almost 31 years to the day when the film was originally released in 1990. Another tidbit is I know I was going to the movies the month before because August 22nd of 1990 was when Pump Up the Volume came out. So I would have gone down to the mall in Houston and seen that, but I don't think I saw Miller's Crossing at the theater, although I remember seeing the trailer many times when we would rent VHS tapes, and you would have the trailers on before the film. And so I remember seeing the sequence in the forest many times, but I don't think I saw it until college a couple of years later. There was a video store that was off of Mopac that had a deal where you could get 5 VHS tapes for $5 for 5 days. And so I bought a VCR sometime around 94 or 95, and then just went through everything that I had never had the chance to see. I mean, and that was a ton of stuff from the 70s and early 80s that I had missed. And I'm pretty sure, dwelling upon it these last few days, that's when I rented Miller's Crossing for the first time. And I remember that the first movie I watched after taking the bar exam in South Carolina in 2002 to decompress was this movie as well, which is probably my most memorable viewing. I remember also that accompanying that, the only 6-pack of beer I could find to decompress was Blue Moon.
Oh man,
so it was a mixed deal. But I have watched this movie over the years. Every time it comes out on DVD, Blu-ray, what have you, I've bought it. I think I have the digital version on Amazon. Although when I rewatched it again for this, I had to dig out my Blu-ray. So as soon as they announce the 4K, I'll do that if that's in the works. But I mean, I've loved the movie for many years. I've watched it many times over the years. It's always just so, I'm just so impressed with just how smooth and wonderful and perfect it is in so many ways.
So I first saw the trailer, I remember, at the Lowe's Cinema in Spring, Texas. It was near the Blimp Hangar. If you're ever driving up I-45 and you remembered where that was, it was across the street from the Blimp Hangar. And I remember I started checking the paper to see where it was showing. And the only place it showed, and it's worth noting, this movie completely, in air quotes, tanked at the box office. But it also never really got a wide release, as far as I can tell, because it just was not in a city the size of Houston, Texas, which if you're not from the States or you don't really know population of cities, Houston even then was like the 5th or 6th biggest city in the country. It was in one art theater downtown at the Galleria. And I think that was it. Maybe one other theater that was in the middle of the city. But it didn't end up at like Lowe's. It wasn't at like the General Cinemas or any of that. It just didn't really get that kind of traction. So if you're looking at it and you're like, man, it didn't really make much money, it never got a chance to do so. And those art house theaters were often turning movies over pretty quick, especially in that era, as indie movies were kind of coming out hard and fast. I did eventually see it as soon as it hit VHS, as soon as I saw that the movie had come out. And I think my interest in it was piqued. I'd just come off that year having seen like The Godfather the year before, and had been obsessed with that. And so anything that was like a mobster picture, I was kind of interested in at that point. And then kind of the style and visuals. And I'd seen Raising Arizona. I had not yet seen Blood Simple. So I was fascinated with what the hell are the Raising Arizona guys doing? Because this is, not the same mood. It doesn't look at all like the same sort of thing. So I eventually watched it by myself. We'd moved to Houston, and my brother hadn't moved with us. He stayed in Austin for his senior year of high school. And I remember like my parents went to bed and I threw it in the VCR and watched it and was like, oh my God, what am I looking at? And I frankly didn't entirely understand it. I was 15 years old, 15 or 16, and ended up watching it again at least one more time, maybe twice, before I had to hand it back in, because I wanted to make sure I at least basically understood the plot. It is incredibly complex, and it's something that I kind of forget because I've seen it now probably 40 times, something like that. So I know almost every line of dialogue. It's one of those movies where you realize now that you're quoting it, but you've kind of absorbed the quote so much into your patter that you forgot that that's why you say that thing.
I regret not beginning this by asking you what's the rumpus.
Damn it! That would have been perfect.
Yes, I just realized that we could have and should have done that. One thing you were saying a second ago is the theatrical release, and as I was, looking at things, I realized that in 1990, when this was released, it came out just a few days within the release of Goodfellas, less than a week. And so I wonder what effect, if any, that had on the amount of attention that the film got. Because, I like Goodfellas a lot, but I don't go back to it and watch it the same way that I do this movie. And I certainly wish I had seen it in 1990 at the theater, if only to be able to say that I did.
Yeah, most people didn't. And I remember even in high school then, like whether it was on the trailers or not before movies, I was one of like 3 people I knew who had seen this movie. It was like a magical thing when you bring it up with people and they actually knew what you were talking about. And when people had seen it, they loved it. And it's kind of weird because I don't think the reviews were good. They're not great. There's also kind of this incredible gap because so I flash forward to I believe in college, maybe right after college. And I'd been at the Half Price Books on Guadalupe, and on kind of a whim, I'd never read any Dashiell Hammett. I bought this collection of Dashiell Hammett novels, and I was reading them on an airplane. I still remember exactly sitting in the middle seat between my mother and my brother, flying somewhere with my family, reading Red Harvest and going, oh, because I'd seen Miller's Crossing probably 15, 20 times at this point. And suddenly realizing like they really, really based this movie on this guy's books. And not having had read or seen The Glass Key yet. They've never turned Red Harvest into a movie. which is kind of remarkable. It's been borrowed from for Last Man Standing, I think, is the Bruce Willis movie.
Which I did see at the theater on Riverside.
I saw it at the Arbor. And I almost walked out. That's my memory of seeing Last Man Standing. I was like, this movie is really boring. Violent and boring, and that's a hard combo to pull off.
It was fine. It was the 90s. It was fine.
Yeah. It's also, in theory, the basis for Yojimbo. That's debatable. But The Glass Key, then, I read pretty shortly after that, and that really feels like Miller's Crossing. There's a combination of a mob boss and his lieutenant, and them. That's what the whole story is about, is them kind of parting ways. So the lieutenant can go off and pretend that he's part of the other mob and all the rest of it. So then you get this whole fistful of dollars potential combination. But it also turned me in a roundabout way into a lifelong Dashiell, or not a lifelong, but the past few decades Dashiell Hammett fan. Like, I've been told by Justin, who's on the podcast from time to time, you got to read some Dashiell Hammett. And I was like, yeah, I'll get around to it. When I finally did, I was like, this is why Justin's been telling me to read this for years and years. But yeah, so I mean, I still, to this day, I think it's just been within the last year I haven't been reading any Dashiell Hammett, partially because I've made it through a huge chunk of what he's written at this point. So I've got a shelf full of it over here to my left. But yeah, I mean, so it ended up having kind of these ripple effects as I kind of dug backward into kind of what were the influences on this. At the same time, while this was coming out almost immediately afterward, Barton Fink came out. And I watched Blood Simple in there somewhere. I don't really remember when I saw Blood Simple, but it was before I graduated high school. But yeah, I mean, it's got this kind of crazy cast. It's not definitely a necessarily. It kind of is reflective of the era for sure. Gabriel Byrne stars as Tom Regan, and then Albert Finney plays Leo, the boss, and John Turturro plays Bernie Birnbaum. J.E. Freeman plays the Dane. John Polito plays Johnny Casper. Steve Buscemi is the Mink. It also has Mike Starr, who I still get excited every time that guy shows up in something. He was in stuff like Dumb and Dumber. He always plays like the big tough guy, sometimes dumb, sometimes smart. Al Mancini was in it. Michael Jeter is in it for like 2 seconds. And of course, there's a cameo by Sam Raimi. But also, it stars Marcia Gay Harden. She's, I think, the only woman with a speaking role in the movie. It is definitely a man's world. Like, we're in the underworld. We're away from, anything that should be affecting, families and decent people. And so these guys have, kind of done what gangsters did and kind of cloistered away from. And so you do have some malls and whatnot. And Marcia Gay Harden is kind of a player within this whole world. Did you go ahead?
So perfect in the movie. And by the way, just about 10 years out of the University of Texas when this was shot, it's sort of funny to watch a movie like this so many years later, because now I'm older than all of the characters, or most of them anyway. But she's just so perfect in the role. And I mean, I just don't think enough can be said about how she is, how confident she is, how comfortable she is as the character that her character is playing, in order to put up a front to do what she needs to be done in the way that the society at that time would allow her to do things. By the way, I will tell you there's at least one other actress with a speaking role. Frances McDormand is in it for about 20 seconds. And then we have Casper's wife, who speaks in Italian in a wonderful moment of the movie. And then, of course, there's the woman at Leo's club who begins to scream and hit Tom with her purse after an inopportune encounter. So, but I think you're right. I mean, this clearly is, a heavily male cast, but everybody in it is so good. And as I was thinking about it yesterday, you don't usually have a cast where everybody is as good as everyone is here. And, Mike Starr, when Tom hits him with the chair and says, "Jesus, Tom," I mean, just the way he does that and then walks out of the room is just so great. But I think everybody has some wonderful moments in it, and it's just such a delight to watch.
Yeah, I definitely want to circle back and talk considerably more about Marcia Gay Harden in this film, and my own personal ties. But I promised I would do synopses because we didn't do that for like the first 155 episodes. So I'm trying to be a better citizen. And this movie is really hard to give a synopsis to, but basically it's a lower level crime boss comes to the chief crime boss of the city. Johnny Casper comes to Leo and says, I believe that this guy, Bernie Birnbaum, who I place bets with, is just selling me out on my fixed fights, and I need to kill him. And Leo says no, because Leo is currently seeing Bernie's sister, who is played by Marcia Gay Harden, Verna, and Tom says no. You need to let Bernie go on this one. Leo says nope. We're gonna go ahead if we have to go into a gang war over this. I need partially because he needs to assert his authority. And then things kind of go sideways. Tom decides that he is going to leave Leo's employ after he has been running around. You find out he's been running around with Verna himself. And then there's a lot of back and forth. If you've ever seen something like Yojimbo or Fistful of Dollars, you know that there's, what are the characters up to? Where are their loyalties? And so then the movie really plays on, and they say it right at the start of the movie. I played I'm going to try and find the audio and play it at the beginning of the podcast, but it's about, friendship. It's about ethics. It's about loyalty. Who is double crossing whom in this movie, and what are their motivations? Because so much, as much as what people say is important, and the dialogue in this is as whip smart as any movie you're going to ever see, it's as important what people don't say. I have seen this movie, as I said, dozens of times. I was watching it again this time, and I think I realized something in the first scene I'd never realized before, which is Eddie Dane actually wants to kill Bernie Birnbaum because he's figured out Bernie Birnbaum is also seeing his boyfriend Mink. Not that he figures it out later, that he knows in that moment already. I think that there's just a ton of things that the Coens baked into the script that are sideways motivations of all of the characters. And in reading Glass Key, and I think all of it's coded, I think that there's literally two ways to watch this movie, where you can have completely different motivations for Tom. And I'm going to throw this on the table for you. And this is a huge spoiler if you've not seen the movie. I think that one way is to look at it is Tom and it's the way I saw it for years and years, that Tom is in love with Verna, and he blows everything up because he wants to be with Verna. And I think that that's a completely legit reading. And I think the other reading is he's in love with Leo. And sorry, Jim, I can't hear you right now.
It's an interesting theory, and the since we're going with 31-year-old spoilers, the very last scene when Leo begs Tom to return, it almost reads like a post-breakup invitation to get back together. And there's the moment where Verna challenges Tom to say that the reason why he's upset is because he's jealous, but jealous of what? That's left intentionally ambiguous. And so I think there's something to that. But you really have to sort of dive into the movie and see it a couple of times to appreciate that. Which really does speak to the complexity of the movie and the plot and the characters' motivations. And watching it again yesterday, it's just striking to me how every line, every word, every look is just, it's as if it's just meticulously planned out, where there's nothing extraneous, nothing superfluous. And of course it was meticulously planned out because it was the Coen brothers, and that's how they do these things. But it's one of those movies where each time you watch it, you pick up something new, even if you've already seen it 10 or 15 times.
Yeah. There's, at this point I've seen it enough to where, because we're well past like 36 times I've seen this movie. I think I've got most of it, but like I said, I still was like, oh, Eddie Dane knows already. This isn't something that's revealed to him, and he's using Johnny to get at Bernie. So that's his like opening motivation, not just that he's, wanting to stick it to Tom and to Leo, which is how I had seen it for 30 years. That's some, I'm not a dumb guy. I think, I think I pick up on stuff. But if you kind of open, there's so much visual that goes on in the movie, and I think you're right. Every look has a meaning. When people don't respond, you need to be able to kind of fill in the gaps of what are they actually saying. It's not a film that I think on a first viewing you're going to have really actually gotten what's there. I think, and I've seen some people who've said, oh yeah, it's all style, but there's nothing else there. And I'm just kind of like, what are you talking about? It is highly stylized. It's an absolutely stunning looking movie. It was shot by then cinematographer turned director Barry Sonnenfeld, who ended up doing the Men in Black movies and stuff like that. And it kind of comes from this interesting, it's an interesting melding of having these kind of beautiful tableau shots, but also kind of mixing in a lot of the movement of the camera that almost feels Sam Raimi-esque at times, where they're like the shot of Drop Johnson kind of shouting that you wanted me to throw the audio.
I need to make that my ringtone is what I need. That needs to be when people call me.
But the camera like zooming in on Drop is like, well, that's a Sam Raimi shot. That's an Evil Dead shot. And I wouldn't say they do quite as much motion as all of that. Most of it is kind of the lovely tableau, kind of still things were there. I watched a doc on the Blu-ray, and the Blu-ray is a bit of a mess, and we should talk about that. Where they interviewed Sonnenfeld, and he was talking about how he used wide lenses to make sure everything was in the frame was in focus, because he thought everything in the frame in this film was super important. Whereas in Raising Arizona, he'd been using the wide lens mostly to be able to push actors' faces right into the camera. And here he was like, well, I had the people pulled back a little bit so you could see all of the detail, and everything in those frames is actually important. So. I did take a few notes. I mentioned Barry Sonnenfeld. The music's by Carter Burwell. The main theme, which you'll have heard at the beginning of this podcast, is based loosely on something called Lament for Limerick. The Leo and Tom kind of being from the Irish mob. The production designer was Dennis Gassner, who is a gentleman who has tons and tons of credits out there. Art direction was Leslie McDonald, and set decoration was Nancy Hay. And costuming was by Richard Horning. The reason I wanted to bring up costuming was a lot of times when people were doing mob movies in this era, and I'm thinking of whatever the Johnny Depp, Richard Grieco maybe was in it. Mobsters. Kind of coming off Untouchables. Everybody was like hiring Armani and people like that to do the costuming. And so everyone looks, not just of the era, but looks like $1 million. And this has a lot more of kind of a working class, like, I don't know where they got all the costumes and hats. I have no idea if it was just costume rental, but it ends up looking a lot more, just not doesn't have that sheen to it that those movies had, like Mobsters, where it looks like a late 80s, early 90s movie. This one just looks different from everything else that was coming out at the time.
Well, and it was shot in New Orleans and not New York, and just, shot in a much, maybe not to say much more interesting way, but it really gets you and just pulls you right in. I think you just feel that you're a part of this world in so many different ways. And I'm not sure that's a world I want to be a part of, but for 2 hours, I certainly want to be. So.
Yeah, I think like the color palette is there's no punch to it at all. It's kind of a mix of like tan and kind of bourbon color and with a lot of green. Then they're out at Miller's Crossing. It's always cloudy when they're outside in general because they shot it in New Orleans. It's always cloudy. So you never really get a lot of sunlight or daylight in this movie. I can think of maybe 2 scenes where they're outside, including the scene with Rugg Daniels, where there's any like actual like bright daylight. And I will say the first time I saw this movie, the shot of Rugg Daniels with the kid, I was laughing so hard I was crying. It's such just
the way the dog tilts its head out of curiosity, and the kid is just perfect. Where's that kid now? What does he say when he's at the bar? I was the kid who took Rugg Daniels' rug in Miller's Crossing. But yeah, that's just such a great scene. And then Leo, they took his hair, so
maybe it was engines.
That's right.
Yeah, it's such like a weird Norman Rockwell-esque, like sort of painterly setup, and it's this stupid looking kid, all grubby 1930s street kid with his dog, like Little Orphan Annie or something. It just stealing a guy's wig right off of his head. Just an absolutely great scene. But that's one of several scenes I guess we could talk about. There's the ladies' powder room scene, which you kind of go from this other palette into we said there aren't many women in the film. This is a woman's space in the film that Tom invades. He just walks right into it, telling all the women to cover their eyes. He's coming through. And he's in there looking for Verna because he wants to talk to her about what she's been up to. He thinks she's turning Leo around. And it's a remarkable scene in the movie. It even, for the era, we can talk about kind of what a strong female character is. And this is where I think they lifted a bit from Red Harvest and a character that's in that book. That Verna as a character is much stronger. But she's, this is where you find out, you see this character who she does carry a gun. And Tom also isn't really a gun person. They're kind of operating on this other angle within kind of the extra world or extra legal world of the movie. But they get into this argument where he's like, I'm finding helpless women and intimidating them. And she's like, well, go out and find a helpless woman. It's an absolutely terrific, bit of banter and back and forth. And that was scripted exactly as it was played. That she really got into it and knew how to really handle that scene and handle the other characters.
I can't imagine anybody playing that role any better than she did. And it's just like I said, it's just so perfect. The way she carries herself in what must be a tough world for her, due to all of the obstacles that would have been placed in her path as a woman. I guess this was the 1920s is when it's set. And, there's a scene where she arrives at Tom's home and knocks, and he answers the door, and she doesn't say anything and he doesn't say anything. And she walks in and sits down, and he pours her a drink and she takes it, and there's just no dialogue. And it's just such a perfect moment, the way they both play the scene and carry themselves. And I could watch those two interact with each other for another 2 hours, but so good.
Yeah, I said I promised I would mention kind of what the personal tie was. So I'd watched this movie for probably a year and a half, and I ended up going to I think I figured it out when I was at drama camp between my junior and senior year of high school that Marcia Gay Harden had gone to UT, and I was working with a guy there. I'm not going to name names, but he was a faculty member at UT. And he was like, oh yeah, I used to hang out with her in school. And I was like, oh my God. And he's like, well, actually, now that I think about it, because he knew my drama instructor, he's like, she was really good friends with your teacher. And I kind of blinked. I was like, what? So when I got home, I called my drama teacher and I was like, Marcia Gay Harden? She's like, you know who she is? And I was like, yeah, Miller's Crossing is like my favorite movie. And so yeah, they'd been roommates in college. And she, started telling me some stories. And then she's like, well, sometime when the timing's right, I'll call her and with you on the phone. And so you can say hi to her. And I think we tried to dial her once and she didn't pick up because this is, the 90s. People didn't have caller ID or whatever. But I never did talk to her. I will say that. But
she was in town here in Charlotte shooting a movie about a month or two ago. And apparently they closed down an independent supermarket less than a mile from my house to go film that scene. And I was out of town that day, and probably good because I would have, if I had been here, I would have figured out some way. Oh, how do I get in there? How do I become an extra? Whatever else.
I don't know if you've seen The Mist, but you don't want to be in a small grocery store with Marcia Gay Harden.
That is true. I have seen The Mist, and I read The Mist. The Mist is actually one of my favorite Stephen King short stories of all time, and she was quite good in that as well. But you're right. Good call on that.
But yeah, she was so, and I'm going to be honest about this. She was like my first really big, and this is before I knew any of like the personal connections, my big movie crush. Like I had like, little like, oh, Linda Carter is, pretty and she's on TV sort of things. But this was the movie that I was like, oh my God. And it was, not Marcia Gay Harden. It was Verna, right? I mean, it was, here's this incredibly tough, ballsy woman who answers the door in her bra and smokes a cigarette while she stares you down, and I was like, that's awesome. I love that. But so yeah, I mean, I was like 15 or 16, whatever it was when I first rented this, just going like, that's the lady for me, not knowing that lady will make you end up dead. Don't like that lady.
That's a perilous enterprise. That.
But yeah, I mean, I think she's terrific, and I get really frustrated because she does do really good work. She's an Academy Award winner at this point. but then you see like she'll take the paycheck and be in 50 Shades of Grey, and you're like, oh.
Oh, I didn't even know she was in 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, I saw Pollock at the theater, and of course, I say that now. I realize that was 20 years ago, which is amazing. I'm gonna have to go see whatever it was that they shot here in Charlotte. It escapes me now, but I'm having trouble coming up with too many things that she's been in over the last 30 years. I know she was in Space Cowboys, which actually was not a bad movie for what it was. And then The Mist, of course, which I had been anticipating for many years. And they certainly got the ending right on The Mist. But then that, and then Pollock, which I'm due for a rewatch as well. But yeah, you need to call your drama teacher up and make that phone call happen again.
I am sure it's been many, many years since she's actually had a conversation with her. But yeah, she absolutely is. I mean, it's a tough, world out there for anyone. I can't feel too bad for someone who's still working, has an Academy Award, but I died a little inside when she showed up as, the Christian Grey's mother, adopted mother in the movie. Gabriel Byrne, this was kind of his first, big thing that he did in the States. I think it opened the doors for him, and ended up getting him like Usual Suspects, and he still pops up and stuff, from time to time. He's not a huge star over here in the US, but
he was in Hereditary, which is very interesting. Definitely a different movie. And then of course, End of Days. I think the reason I went and saw End of Days at the theater was because of Gabriel Byrne. This was the period when Arnold Schwarzenegger was producing diminishing returns. But Gabriel Byrne playing the devil was enough to get me to go see that. But yeah, I mean, I can't imagine a better role for him than this. And he's never worked with the Coen brothers again, I don't think. So,
which is odd. I mean, he had clearly a really good relationship with them from everything I saw kind of from the media from that era. But yeah, they have some people that they use over and over. Obviously, Steve Buscemi shows up again then in like, 2 or 3 of their other movies. But, I mean, they also haven't worked with Nick Cage multiple times. Holly Hunter hasn't popped up again that I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, Trey Wilson from Raising Arizona was supposed to play Leo, and unfortunately he had like a brain aneurysm or something and died like just before they started shooting. And somehow out of that they end up getting Albert Finney, who, if you're trying to place him, he's Daddy Warbucks from Annie from 1982. And he's, in England at least, and kind of in the UK, a big star, and has been in lots of things that have been in the US. So I know Gabriel Byrne was absolutely thrilled that suddenly he was working with Albert Finney on this movie. It's also like Turturro would go on, of course, to be Barton Fink, and he had kind of his run as a huge star in kind of the 90s and stuff like Quiz Show. And he's still obviously doing lots of good stuff, unless you count the Transformers franchise. And I don't. But he, I mean, it was kind of this weird ground zero, and you see weird references to this movie pop up over and over. Like this weekend, I was reading this collection of Elvira comic books, of all things, and they go on this weird tangent of it was a Elvira thing called The Shape of Elvira, where it's like riffing on Shape of Water. And the FBI agent is Agent Polito, who they have drawn to look like John Polito. And he keeps dropping lines from Miller's Crossing in his dialogue in the comic. It was just like super, super strange. and I've seen little things like that. Of course, they've riffed on it in the Fargo TV show here and there. But you will see, people who love the movie want to kind of share their love for it. And so it does just pop up in these sometimes very strange places.
Yeah, I do talk about it with people. I actually was texting a friend of mine last night who's 10 years younger than me. He'd never heard of it,
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how many people who weren't aware of it when it initially came out, or in the 90s, or sort of just obsessed film people like we are, how they might find this movie now, how they might stumble across it with all the clutter that we have that's streaming and the like. I feel like I have to go out and convert people to the Miller's Crossing way, because some people aren't as fully aware of it, and we have to proselytize, but you can tie everything to it. We were talking about Marcia Gay Harden. She won the Oscar for Pollock at the same ceremony where Albert Finney was nominated for Aaron Brockovich.
Crazy. Okay.
So hopefully they got to reminisce at that ceremony. Sadly, Albert Finney did not win, but
I'm trying to think. They were only in the same scene at the funeral.
Is that right? Maybe that's right. Yeah.
In theory, they were in the same place when Leo shows up at Tom's apartment looking for her, but she's in the other room the whole time. You don't even know she's there.
That's right. And she makes the decision at the end to go with him. Probably a good decision economically, if not good for other reasons. I think I was thinking last night, one of the signs that a movie is so good and engrossing is that you wonder what the characters are doing after the movie ends. And thankfully the Coen brothers are never going to give us the answer to those questions. It'll just be present in our mind. But I keep returning to the movie, which now is 3 decades old, and it's just so good. You can't help but wonder, well, what did these people do next? Did Tom ever go back to work with Leo? What became of them? But we have this great 2-hour movie, and that's all we're ever going to get, and that's good. That's for the best. But it's just a good sign that you wonder what all these people with their wonderful sayings and the like. It is disappointing to think that these characters lived another several decades and then dropped all of their 1920s gangster slang to go to the 1950s, keen, cool, whatever else. But
I do wonder. So the dialogue, the way it's written, definitely reflects, stuff I haven't really seen anywhere else in this kind of density as Red Harvest, and it had been completely stripped out by the time you get to the movie of Glass Key. It's in Glass Key. And that movie ends, the book doesn't end the same way. The book ends very much like Miller's Crossing, of like the two characters parting ways and the Tom analog going off to New York from whatever city they're in. I think they're in California. And in the movie, it's Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake, and they basically are packing a trunk, and Brian Dunleavy comes in and chips him on the shoulder and says, "You two kids go be in love in New York." And they get on a train, and it has a very kind of Hays Code era ending where they've learned and they're not going to do crime anymore. But it's still a really good film, and it has some remarkable sequences that I highly recommend watching that movie at some point if you haven't done so. There's a lot more of the political angle of the mob, because they say Leo's running politics in town, and it's just a fact. Brian Donlevy in Glass Key is doing it, but it's a lot more tenuous, and he has an election on the line at that point, and there's a lot of other things that are mixed up in it. But yeah, I think that it's a good sign of any movie that you do want to spend more time with the characters. And of course, that's how we end up getting sequels. But that's just not what the Coen brothers do. To your point about people not knowing about it, it's weird. I mean, the Coen brothers were the, high watermark for us, when we were in our 20s. Like, is it as good as the Coen brothers? And it felt like they were always one-upping themselves. It was like you had this, and then you had something like Fargo that ended up really capturing the popular imagination, and then they zagged to something like The Man Who Wasn't There, that people, I've only seen that one once. I was like, I don't really know what to make of this movie. I really need to revisit it. A Serious Man is not something you take a date to on Saturday night. Inside Llewyn Davis is a remarkable film, but it's not Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And as far as like, again, something you take a date to on a Saturday night. And the Coen brothers stuff can be so good, and for reasons I can't even really articulate. Like, every time I watch the final scene of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where it's just like the string of kids walking, kind of across the camera, I almost get like choked up. Like, I'm like, I can't believe how good the sequence is. And I've heard of people kind of having that reaction to various points in Miller's Crossing. Like, we haven't even talked about the Danny Boy sequence, wildly violent, like insanely violent. When I first started dating Jamie, I went up to her parents' house in Oklahoma, and we were watching it, and her dad crept into the back of the room because that's where he was working on his model ship. And it was like right before that scene, and I was like, oh God. And it's insanely violent, and he just looks up and he's like, what are you guys watching? He's seeing this guy get riddled with Tommy gun bullets, and like shoot his gun around as he's like bouncing around off the bullets. But it's still it's a beautiful sequence. You can't get around it.
Of course, expecting that, watching it again last night, and it really holds on the shot of the bad guy getting plugged with bullets. And I'm as I watched it last night, I'm wondering how many bullets does the Thompson hold to allow Leo to shoot as many as he did, because he takes out that guy and then he takes out the car. And I don't know that we see him reload. And of course, it's not even his gun. It's when he picks up off of the body of one of the other henchmen. But my goodness, it definitely holds on that henchman getting filled with bullets for more than a brief moment, which is very interesting.
I can tell you two things. One, in Las Vegas, I shot a Tommy at one of those like go shoot a gun places. And you go through bullets incredibly fast. Like, you squeeze down and you've emptied, if it's just a clip and not the drum, if you just pull down and squeeze, the clip is empty. You're done. And they were getting frustrated with me because I wouldn't just pull. I was like, no, I want to do this as long as I can. I've paid my bucks. Someone did the math and figured out, I saw online, I don't know how true this is, they said he would have had to reload 6 times.
See, and that's the thing, is that how many movies would prompt someone to actually perform math out of love for the narrative and for that scene? I don't know that any movie is going to make me go do math just because I was told there would be no math. But I think that's the thing. And you look online at the people who write about this movie or who talk about it. And I don't know that I've seen anybody who doesn't just love all of it or the super majority of it in this great way. That opening scene, my goodness. I mean, there are not many opening scenes of a movie that capture the essence of it and give you information without making it seem like they're just feeding you exposition. And John Polito is just so great in that scene and in every other. I mean, every time I watch it, I use the phrase "the high hat" for the next 3 or 4 months, and just the anger that he displays in several sequences is just very, very real, even though some of it's played for comedy. John Polito went on to be on Homicide, Life on the Street, a couple of years later, playing Cressetti, and it was just so great. One of the sad things about rewatching a movie like this all these years later is you follow up with the careers of the actors and realize that a number of them are no longer with us. Of course, it's been 30 years, but I mean, like I said a moment ago, everybody is just great in this movie, and there's just so few movies that, I don't want to compare it to Casablanca, but I mean, that's another movie where everybody is great, whether they're in a small role or a large role or a medium role, and that's just one of the great joys of this movie.
I completely agree. I mean, there's, a dozen smaller parts. All of the characters, all the actors who are in it, they clearly cast for a look for everybody, from Drop Johnson to the police commissioner, plus that guy's, gravelly police commissioner voice. Even like Tad, the bookie / bartender that Tom's talking to, and he's, he kind of got this weird Slavic accent that, he's only in like 3 scenes, but you really like the guy. 3 scenes. You see why Tom's constantly kind of hanging around the guy. But there's also, I can't remember the character's name right now off the top of my head. I think it might be Trevor or something like that. But he's kind of got the weird Andy Warhol haircut and the mustache who, gets Tom, beats him up in the telephone booth. But they have these like really clear, here's who this person is. It's this fully realized world. I said, well, Marcia Gay Harden's the only woman with a speaking role, and you reminded, but it's all these characters, like Johnny Casper's wife, who's very specific and how they dress her, how she behaves, how you're introduced to her, which is she's already in motion. She's talking. She's, so I was taking Italian my freshman year of college, and I rewatched this movie, and she just basically says over and over, the doctor's saying he's eating too much. So I'm not sure she actually spoke Italian or those were the lines they gave her. And I don't speak Italian at all anymore, but I was watching it and I was like, well, she just keeps saying the same thing over and over. And then Johnny, you know what she's saying, because Johnny says, what does the doctor mean he's eating too much? And I'm like, well, that's the only thing she just said over and over for like a minute there. But yeah, it's and that's something the Coen brothers have always kind of really, really been able to do, where they don't let anybody just fade into the background. If you have an interaction with a lead character, you have to be a character as well. They're not just dealing with ciphers kind of cruising through their world. You don't have anyone who's, just, even Tom has a landlord who has like 2 lines, and one of them is like, are my cats going to be okay after she hears the gunshots? So something about this lady. So much about this lady. And she's got 2 lines and disappears, and you probably don't think about her at all when you're not watching the movie.
Everybody is fully realized, and the other guy that you mentioned, whose name escapes me, Leo's sort of other right hand man who appears to take over after Tom leaves. He's the guy that says Leo's an artist with a Thompson. He's the one that sort of delivers the message from Leo to Tom when Tom's in the phone booth. And you can tell that Leo is delivering this out of love. Tom, you want to sit this one out. This is not a warning that we would give to anybody else, but, be careful. And then this henchman who's giving the the warning, punches Tom in the gut one last time when Tom makes a distasteful remark, and he says, "Is that also from Leo?" He says, "No, that's from me." And you just get the sense that this guy is this loyal person who doesn't fully appreciate what Tom is up to. And the plot, I have to admit, I feel like when I watch it, I need to keep some sort of chart about who is doing what, and the fix is being controlled by who, and whatever else. And of course, an overly complicated plot is a staple of some of these old noir crime gangster movies from those days. And so, I think I really still, even after all these years, have to sit down and kind of process, okay, so what's Mink doing? What's he done? What's he doing with Drop Johnson? How's all this working out? And then how is Tom spinning it to serve his purposes? And of course, Tom is making all these great plays and the like. Really, it's sort of astonishing that he's able to convince Johnny Casper to turn on the Dane, who he says he has known for many years. We go way back, he says. And, the fact that Tom is the chief protagonist and is relying really solely on his wits, because he is not portrayed as someone who is particularly skillful with a weapon. He's constantly being beat up by people. He is not, by any sense of the term, an action hero in a way that other movies, would make this character. I'm not sure he successfully physically fights anybody with a great degree in the movie. It's all his wits, which makes him so much more fascinating as a character. I guess he does overtake Bernie at the end, but as far as fisticuffs, there's that scene where Bernie sort of turns the tables on him, where Turturro gets to just have this delicious moment where Bernie gets to be very cocky when he realizes that he can use something against Tom. And then Tom, leaps out the window in order to meet him downstairs, and then trips, drops the gun, and Bernie just walks by, makes a snide remark, and kicks him while he's down. So
yeah, it's an interesting inversion of how smooth Leo is, like jumping out the window with the Thompson and taking everybody out. Like Tom jumps out the window, and it ends with him flat on his face in the middle of a hallway, getting a shoe shoved in his chin. But yeah, I definitely wanted to talk a bit about it starts with this kind of thesis statement from Johnny Casper of like, I'm talking about, and I'm not afraid to say it, ethics, who's a friend, who's not a friend. At the very beginning of the movie is absolutely the nut of, these are the things you need to pay attention to. Who's in on crosses, who's double crossing each other. And Tom's double and triple crossing people all over this movie. Does Tom have any ethics? He seems to definitely have loyalty to Leo, but he's displaying it through a double cross, a triple cross, really. He's double crossing Verna. He ends up double crossing Bernie and Johnny. Johnny is looking for someone who will just play straight with him in this world. And that ends up being his downfall, because he thinks he's been double crossed, but he hasn't been. But he is while he's being double crossed. It's a very interesting question.
And Johnny does appear to adhere to these ethics, because he shoots down the Dane's proposal that they double cross Tom, and he expresses some surprise that they took Tom out to the woods to investigate whether he really did kill Bernie, a scene we'll have to talk about. But but then in the end, he acts, in that wild scene. Oh my goodness, where you would not expect it, and that's the great thing about the Coen brothers in this movie is that you would not expect the primary villains in a film like this to be killed by people other than the protagonist. In a modern Hollywood version of this movie, the suits would require that Gabriel Byrne kill both Casper and the Dane and make some pun while doing it, but Johnny Casper kills the Dane, and Johnny Casper is killed off screen, in a scene where Tom only comes upon it again later, and allowing us to see this great last interaction between Tom and Bernie.
Yeah. I mean, the movie's savvy enough to know that the real push is between the two kind of double cross artists of he and even Verna, who is in theory, trying to spin people. She's spinning Leo. She's trying to spin Tom to some extent, although you get the feeling she fell for Tom somewhere along the way. That it's really kind of, how twisty turny Bernie is and how twisty turny Tom is. And it just ends up at that particular moment, Bernie makes the wrong call and trusts Tom as a square shooter, right?
He just hands him the gun.
Yeah.
I mean, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Come on, Bernie, what are you doing? I mean, you've lived on your wits this whole time. And, so Turturro really is very interesting in this movie. He is, you've got the scene where he breaks into Tom's apartment twice, I guess, two scenes. And then you've got the scene in the woods, which is the scene I think that I first saw in the ads. And, the look into your heart scene, which is a very genuine seeming. Anybody in that position has got to be gripped with the greatest fear they've ever encountered. And so for an actor to draw upon that emotion, which may not even be an emotion that they have ever experienced before in their life, is just a wonder. And the acting craft is such where you have to look at what he does and how he moves physically, how he speaks, how he cries. It's just amazing that someone can call upon themselves to do so much in a scene. It's just very fascinating. But then you got to wonder, then he makes all these, once Tom spares him and Bernie makes the assumption that Tom is just weak, that he doesn't have it in him. I mean, he starts making sarcastic remarks about it, I'll just turn on the waterworks and you'll drop the gun, and then he tries to go back to the well at the end and do a repeat of the look into your heart speech when Tom's got the gun on him at the end. And by then it's just too little too late. And to the range that Turturro has in this movie is just, really much greater than anybody else in the movie, because he goes from that sort of cocky overconfidence to the bewilderment that he experiences when he realizes at the end that he's been played, to the other, great fear and sadness of facing an imminent death in the woods. And so, I wonder if did he get nominated for anything for this? Do we know?
I don't think this movie got any attention after it did well at the wherever it was. There's some New York Film Festival, and I think in Europe it did well at a film festival or three. But I don't know if it got any specific acting awards. I think it was kind of in retrospect that what happened in that scene came to be really appreciated. Bizarrely, the time I saw it lifted from the most was in the pilot for that Batman show called Gotham. They have the character who is playing the Penguin. Basically, they redo that sequence. That's the origin of the Penguin, is him thinking he's about to get knocked off. And I was like, are you kidding me? As I was watching this sequence, like, you're just doing Miller's Crossing. You can't just do Miller's Crossing. And that's just what they do. It's on a pier, but it's exactly the same thing. It was, I was already not excited.
It was an homage, Ryan. It was an homage.
And fair enough. I mean, the movie is an homage of a lot of other things. One of the things I was going to say about that sequence is it's not a parallel, but maybe a parallel, but it's not a one for one. It's not apples to apples. There's a sequence in The Conformist where they are out in the woods and they trap someone, and they're going to assassinate these people, and they chase them through the woods, but it's like a foot chase that's just super awkward, and it just shows you how terrible it would be to be hunted down in the woods. So it's different, but I get the feeling that they kind of looked at The Conformist before they made that sequence. Yeah, I mean, I've sat with people who made me turn off the movie or pause it during that sequence, saying I can't watch this.
Really?
Yeah. Twice it's happened when I've watched it with people. I won't name names, but yeah. And that speaks, I think, to the power of like how effective Turturro is. It doesn't matter like what kind of wiener you thought he was at other points in the movie. He's, your heart goes out to him, which is what he's trying to achieve, in that moment, and tries to turn it back on, as you said.
The desperation, though, I mean, when they're pulling him out of the car and he's grabbing the car so that Tic Tac can't pull him away, it's just, and what's interesting is sort of the casualness of the villainy of Frankie and Tic Tac, both in that scene, but also in the later scene where they're taking Tom out into the woods to see if he really did kill Bernie, and just that this is just another TPS report for these guys.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a part of doing business, to just take people out there and we're reminded multiple times that you're supposed to put one in the brain.
Right.
You can't just get them in the torso, in the chest. You gotta put one in the brain. So.
Yeah, there's in the kind of
which Tom, of course, does at the end.
Yeah, the casualness of kind of how everyone's going about a lot of this is it's just an old script everybody's following. I mean, the police chief and the cops are like raiding these joints. They've, and they kind of make light of it as they're doing it. Yeah, of course we knew this was here. Everyone knows this is here, but we've been told now that we're supposed to actually do something about it. I'm shocked to discover that there's gambling going on here. Yeah. So, I mean, it's even the sequence where they go to the Sons of Erin Club, and when the cops are now aligned with Johnny's gang, and they're shooting up the place, and you get the exact same sequence between, is it that sequence or? No, it's a different sequence, but Tom basically has the same interaction with, Chief O'Brien twice, and it's from completely different sides of who O'Brien's, he's like, whatever, whoever pays my paycheck, that's all I care about. I was going to say about that sequence, and I didn't want to forget, if you don't know what Sam Raimi looks like, the director, he's in that sequence where they're at the Sons of Erin Club. He's the guy who pulls out two pistols and just starts shooting. And then he like laughs because he's killed the guy. And then he gets mowed down, which you can totally see why Sam Raimi thought that was hilarious. And he'd want to do it. The Coen brothers were friends with Sam Raimi. Apparently they'd all been kind of working in the same editing house in New York at some point or something like that. I read about this in the Bruce Campbell book, If Chins Could Kill, but like there was, at least back in the 80s and 90s, they had this weird, just friendship going on, and there was a lot of influencing of each other going back and forth at this time. It was kind of independent film producers of a certain generation. But it's just always funny to me. He was on the box of the VHS tape if you went to Blockbuster back in the day. He was, for some reason, they had him prominently displayed a shot of him as if he were a major character. But yeah, yeah. I mean, what's Chief O'Brien's loyalty? It's to whoever's paying his paycheck. He doesn't care. He's basically a hired gun. He's basically a gangster in a uniform. But yeah, I mean, in the end, this movie, as far as like how it's ended up influencing me kind of through the years, I'm sitting here with 2 feet from me, 3 feet from me, there is a scale replica of the Maltese Falcon, another Dashiell Hammett book. It definitely was an entryway into kind of chasing the high of this movie over the years. Can I find another one that is like this? Can I find another one that has the same sort of impact on me? I have no doubt it's how I started getting into like film noir, kind of pursued it through other gangster pictures, found more of what I was looking for in noir than I ended up finding it in like most. There's, of course, a huge crossover between gangster movies and noir. But it's not been the, Johnny Depp mobsters movie that has necessarily been what gotten me excited. It's not basically the rock star arc of those movies. It's always been the, what story is happening kind of in the shadows and kind of, after everybody decent goes to bed kind of story that, and out of sight and, creaky old warehouses somewhere. That I've found, in those people's, then their interaction then with like legitimate society, I found very, very interesting. And kind of ended up pursuing it through that angle. So I'd say of all the movies I've seen, it's had by far the most long lasting impact of it was what, when I went to film school, I talked a lot about wanting to make sci-fi and things like that. But really I was interested in like, how do you do what the Coen brothers did here? Because they were so young when they did it. You're talking about a couple of guys who like had 2 movies. They'd had Blood Simple and Raising Arizona essentially under their belt. Somehow secure funding for this, and then come up with this great picture. And of course, because it's a great picture, nobody goes to go see it because it's 1990 and everyone wants to see Tom Cruise doing whatever Tom Cruise is going to do.
Taste of Thunder was that summer, which I did see at theater. So
yeah. So yeah, I mean, you talked about like trying to spread the good word of Miller's Crossing. Like, I can't say it's for everybody. It's not. And, it's hard to tell people, well, you're not going to get it on a first viewing. So you're going to want to watch it 5 or 6 times and then you'll appreciate it. But it's just got so much, I think, to offer from like a narrative standpoint, from like you talked about the performances, up and down the ladder of this thing. It's absolutely remarkable. And it's maybe a little flashier than what some of the other films have been, that the Coen brothers have done. It's, Fargo. I'm still amazed Fargo struck a chord with as many people as it did. But they've also gone on to do that, and that was noir. They went on. Big Lebowski is like the most weirdly deconstructed noir, and that really hit a note with people. I know people mostly watch it for the dude, but it's like, this is a Raymond Chandler novel. Like, you guys get, this is a Raymond Chandler novel that they've somehow deconstructed. It just made the detective just kind of float through the whole thing. So
with John Polito in there, right, as well.
Yeah. Brother Seamus.
By the way, I should say Johnny Depp was not in Mobsters. It was Christian Slater, Patrick Dempsey, and Richard Grieco. So and Laura Flynn Boyle also in that one.
Are you serious? So I've never seen Mobsters, I don't think.
Future episode of the podcast dedicated to Mobsters.
Yeah, so I went, I was supposed to, and we always end up having some wild divergence, and this will be, I guess, mine. That summer when it came out, I had tickets to see Sisters of Mercy play with Public Enemy. Wow. A single bill in Houston.
How about that? Where was that?
I don't remember. Somewhere downtown. And a bunch of friends came in from Austin. My brother's friends came in from Austin. And for some reason, we went to Sound Warehouse the day before the show. And they had their kind of like marquee thing up at the top because we bought our tickets there. And it said, "Oh, that show's been canceled." And we're like, "What?" So I had all these guys in that were supposed to be spending the night in from Austin. And we didn't know what to do at that point because we're like in high school. You can't like just go out on the town. So we ended up going to split parties, and half of us went to go see Hot Shots and half of us went to go see Mobsters. And I was a Hot Shots guy. So I saw that instead.
Oh my, Hot Shots. There's something that has not endured.
In my heart, it's endured. But yeah, so that was how I was like, I'm not going to go see that crap. I'm going to go see Hot Shots.
Well, now you have a reason. So, but I'm trying to think. Are there any other scenes that we desperately need to talk about? I mean, I think we went through the Tortura scene. You know, and I, like I said, I know that having watched it again last night, I'll be trying to actively seek opportunities to use some of the dialogue, you know, in that way. But, you know, Leo with the Thompson, you know, the Dane, I read on Wikipedia that Peter Stormare was supposed to be that, play that part, but was unavailable. And so they got him, but I can't imagine anybody else playing the role with as much menace and fierceness as the actor.
Freeman. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just the intensity there is so great.
Yeah.
I mean, really very frightening. And again, I mean, you know, I think we are, you know, all the parents groups in the 80s used to say that all these movies would desensitize us to violence, and they kind of have, but the way, the casualness with which he kills and murders many people is still very troubling, you know. You know, the scene where he goes in and interrogates Verna and then shoots Leo's two bodyguards is still very, very disturbing, the way he just murders the people. And I think that you know, lots of other movies, you know, all right, you know, there's 10 more people that got killed, you know, but for the violence to be affecting, and that's sort of the purpose of the Tortura scene in the forest, is just how frightful these moments are, and how really evil these people are for so casually taking people's lives from them.
Yeah. There's a character in The Glass Key, and I think it's as close to an analog as you're going to find, played by William Bendix, who's very, very different. But they at least took this guy doesn't have whatever is in most people that stops them from doing the most ruthless or cruel thing possible. And I think that sequence is absolutely outstanding, where he kicks in the door to Verna's apartment, and you see her, and it also gives her something to play off of, because she pulls out a gun. You find out, okay, she has been armed this whole time. And she tries to use it, but it's of no use. You know, he just slaps it away, sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it gives him a moment to also be cool, you know, shooting through the door on the wall to hit the one guy. And the cinematography in that sequence is absolutely stunning. It's when they kind of go back to the Raising Arizona tricks of, like, you know, you have this really, everything's in focus, but you have these strong kind of they're pushing the perspective on things with the way they're using the lens. The gun stays in focus, and it's like right in your nose, and he's like way back at the end of it. It's some amazing cinematography. But did you notice at all that one of the guys, did you recognize one of those two guys who are Leo's guys who gets killed?
I did not.
There's no reason you really should. It's the only other time he's appeared in a movie that I'm aware of is he is the guy from Slacker who talks to the people over the documentarians at Les Amis.
Oh my God, you're right. The guy that tells him where Leo is?
Yeah.
That
He's
is
like, check it, it's gold. It's that same guy.
Oh my goodness. That guy, I think he passed away as well. I remember the last time I watched Slacker, I looked into that guy, and he did appear in some stuff, I believe. I think you're going to send me down a Wikipedia rabbit hole after we stop recording. But and there's those. I've got on my phone some of those pictures of Les Amis, just because there's not very many pictures of Les Amis that exist anymore. Yeah. But that guy's great. I did not realize that was him. That's a real Easter egg right there.
Yeah, I mean he's you don't see him in that movie, in Slacker laying on his side, kind of awkwardly looking up. So it might not mean it quite as much, but yeah, he every time I see that, there's a few things in it now that, because I have seen the movie so many times, like the streetcars in it are clearly New Orleans streetcars going by. It plays as kind of this 1920s thing in a really nice way. And of course you see, like in the scene with Michael Jeter where he's like, the horses have knees, and it's like, well, I'd be on my fetlocks, if you bet on me. That's clearly somewhere near the quarter, because it's got like the porch, that they're walking underneath with all the railings and all of that as they're going along. But yeah, it's absolutely a remarkable film. I don't know. I can't really recommend it enough. And if you're over a certain age, and show some patience with it. Really listen to what people are saying, listen to what they're not saying. You said Goodfellas came out at the same time. I think Goodfellas is about as good as American film gets. And I still think that this movie is something I would rather watch if I had to pick between the two. I have more fun watching this than I do Goodfellas. Goodfellas is like, okay, you're going to go through an experience and see something. And this feels more to me like, it definitely has that, but I'd rather spend time with these characters than the kind of all reprehensible ones in Goodfellas.
I don't want to get too dangerously close to relitigating anything Martin Scorsese has said of late, but I'm not going to. But I think I'm with you on the same page, because Miller's Crossing is very fun, but it's also complicated and complex and nuanced, and it's not mobsters, but I think you're right. I think I would rather watch that again than go watch Goodfellas again, even though Goodfellas is excellent. It's just sort of like, I think I'd rather have my cheeseburger than eat my broccoli, But now I'm gonna have to go watch Goodfellas again anyway. So yeah, I think I now have to go watch Slacker, Goodfellas, and Mobsters. So
I'm glad what you took away from this was homework.
That's right. I think the only other thing I'll say is that this came out, and this is probably more about how old I am than anything about the movie in particular. But there was something very fun and intriguing and exciting about discovering movies when you're young and you're studying movies, as we did at the University of Texas, and watching movies like these and learning about them and their nuances and the like. And that period in the early to mid 90s, where people were talking about independent film in a way that they hadn't before, And, suddenly I was in Austin and in college and had much more opportunity to watch all these types of movies, whether they be at the video store or at the Dolby Theater or wherever else. It was just a very fun and exciting time to be a fan of movies and watching things we hadn't seen before. And, now that I'm so much older and don't have as much free time as I do, I feel I don't get to do that as much anymore. And now is an exciting time to be a fan of movies too. And there's so much content, my goodness, but there's nothing quite like going back and watching a movie that you love from an era of film that you love like this. So
yeah,
go see it, people.
Yeah. I mean, kind of my last parting shot on it is, this is one of the few movies, like, I can still feel my juices go when I watch, say, Star Wars Episode 4, if I'm going to be real specific. When I remember the feeling of being a teenager and your brain has finally kind of kicked in and you're beginning to interpret the adult world in a different way, of like, your world is expanding suddenly. You've kind of been like in safe kid zone, enjoying stuff kind of aimed at adolescence. And this was one of the movies that kind of cracked, I said, for the canon, it's something that cracked your skull open. And I would say this movie had a huge part in it. I can remember the feeling of like discovery with this thing, of having a visceral reaction to everything I was being seen. It was, the score, the sexuality, the complexity of the story, the using violence as a punctuation, and the rawness of Turturro's performance, and it's something that you only kind of get for a certain portion of your life before you become jaded because you've seen so much stuff. And you still get it sometimes, for sure. I honestly, Jamie sees me go into meltdown almost every time we finish an episode of Fargo, because I'm like, I can't freaking believe how talented they are working on that TV show. Like, it hits all of my buttons. It makes me feel, because that guy's really tapped into whatever the Coen brothers were doing. And I'm just jealous. I get mad, like, oh my God, this guy's so good. I went to film school. This is what I wanted to be doing, in 1994. And I didn't pursue any of that. For a variety of reasons, and of course your chance of being that guy is 1 in a million, but that's still the thing I kind of can tap into when I watch this film, is remembering, like this movie opened up the world to me in a way that I can only point to maybe 15 things in my life doing in a similar way. That, there was no teacher telling me how to interpret this thing. There were no rails on it. It just existed, and no one told me anything about it. I just experienced it. And I do like, in some ways, returning to it just for that. But it blows my mind that it hasn't continued on as being, it shocks me, frankly, what the millennials and zillennials, or whatever we're calling them, think is a classic movie, or, they're still so stuck on, 1980s popcorn stuff. And it's like, there was so much good stuff, and it makes you realize how much stuff over the generations has just disappeared. This was the stuff for us. What was the stuff that was going on in the 70s and the 60s that we're just not even privy to? So,
well, I can't add anything after that. So
fair enough, man. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll definitely do more. I'm not sure if it'll be Mobster, but
I think we got to do Mobsters.
Man, maybe I'll watch it. We'll talk about it.
I have a feeling that you will soon own Mobsters. So,
Jesus. Well, it's got Laura Flynn Boyle, so how much can I complain?
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much, man. And y'all, if you haven't watched Miller's Crossing in a while, it is available streaming kind of everywhere. I will say the Blu-ray is out there. My copy is not particularly great. I'm going to have to rebuy it. It was actually skipping in a few places. The other thing I noticed is I put on the subtitles on the Blu-ray, and they were wrong, which I had never seen before. So if you're going to watch it with subtitles, watch it streaming. I noticed that streaming, the subtitles are actually correct. So anyway, thanks so much, Jim, and we'll do it again real soon. That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.